The woman in the grey dress and black bonnet had not said one word. She stood at the back of the council chamber with $2 silver folded inside a handkerchief, waiting her turn the way she had been raised to wait. Hands still, eyes low, breath easy. The mayor called her a good sport. The reporter got his photograph. Somebody in the third row laughed into his sleeve. 9 days later, that same man would be standing ankle-deep in barn mud, watching a lawyer flown up from Philadelphia go the color of ash. Because the girl they had handed a $2 ruin, the plain girl with no phone, no attorney, and dirt still dark under her nails, knew exactly what her grandfather had sealed beneath that barn's floor. And the deed she had signed while the room laughed had handed her the one thing $40 million could not go around. Rayburn Hollow sat in the green folds of country an hour west of Lancaster, close enough that the outlet buses sometimes lost their way and rolled past horse and buggy on the shoulder of the road, close enough that the tourists slowed to photograph the Amish farms and then drove on to somewhere with valet parking. The kind of town that fit on a postcard and had begun, lately, to believe the postcard. The kind that liked the plain people well enough in a photograph and rather less at a zoning vote. There had been talk for 2 years. A wellness resort, the men in good suits called it. A destination. 40 acres of the old town commons rezoned in a single Tuesday vote, and a name already painted on the renderings taped to the council wall. Hollow Springs, the letters gold, a woman in white robes on a spa deck where the cow pasture used to be. The only thing between the renderings and the ground was paper. And the last bad piece of paper in Rayburn Hollow belonged to a family that did not vote, did not sue, and did not, as far as anyone could tell, own anything worth the trouble of taking. That was the mistake. An old one. The town had been making it, in one form or another, for 7 generations. Rebecca Stoltzfus was 28, and she had come to the meeting to say 4 sentences. She had written them out that morning on the back of a feed receipt while the coffee cooled, crossing words until only the plain ones were left. She wanted to ask why a demolition notice had been nailed to her grandfather's barn without a single letter mailed to the family that still held its deed. That was all. She had rehearsed it against the rhythm of the rains on the ride in, the mare's ears flicking, the mist burning off fields her people had worked since before the courthouse had a roof. She carried no phone. She had owned one once, in another life, and had learned that a thing which never stops asking for your attention will take all of it if you let it. She paid the parking clerk in cash and folded the change into the same handkerchief that held the $2 silver her grandfather had pressed into her palm the last spring he was alive. "Keep these," Amos had said, in the low German they spoke at the table. A man should always be able to buy back one thing that matters. She had not understood him then. She had been busy and young and gone. Her hands were not soft. A carpenter's hands on a woman's wrists, a seam of old glue at one thumbnail, a burn the shape of a wood, shaving on the back of the left. She kept them folded in her lap, and her spine straight. And to every man in that chamber, who glanced back and then away, she was exactly what the bonnet said. A plain girl, a farm girl, one of the quiet ones from out past the covered bridge who kept to themselves, and could not, would not, be any trouble at all. None of them knew where she had been for the 8 years the town had barely noticed she was missing. None of them knew what she had done to come home. She had not told the community, and she would not tell this room. Because the reason she had left was stitched to the reason she had come back, and both still ached like a green bone that had set a little wrong. Amos Stoltzfus had raised her after the fever took her mother, and grief took her father into the ground beside her within the year. He built barns, real ones, mortise and tenon, frames that outlast the men who raised them. The kind of work that made English contractors drive out on Sundays just to stand inside and look up. He built them without a single drawing on paper, all of it held behind his eyes, and he had one rule he repeated until it lived in her bones. Read the ground before you trust the wall. Keep the paper safe. As a girl, she had thought he meant lumber and receipts. When they called her name, she rose. "You'll be Amos's granddaughter," the mayor said, before she reached the front. Warren Gundry had a big pink face and a smile that arrived a half-second before it meant anything. He had run the town for 11 years and had never once lost. "We were just talking about your family's little place. Sad old thing, falling in on itself out there." "There is a notice on the barn," Rebecca said. "No letter came first." "Well now." Gundry spread his hands to the room, warming himself at the attention. "That's the whole trouble, isn't it? Nobody wants the liability. Structure's a hazard. Insurance won't touch it. Town can't maintain it. And truthfully, dear, I don't imagine you've got the means to bring it up to code." A soft laugh moved through the chamber. Rebecca felt it on the back of her neck like a draft under a door. She held his gaze and said nothing, and the silence stretched a beat past his comfort, so he filled it as loud men fill silence, with a gift nobody had asked for. "Tell you what." He slapped the rail as if the idea had just landed, though a lawyer at the side table had slid him the folder an hour before. "Let's do something good here, something neighborly. The town'll deed you that barn parcel, free and clear, so it's your business what happens to it. Off our books, off our conscience." The grin widened. "Call it $1. No, $2, so it's proper and legal and nobody can say the mayor gave away the store. What do you say, young lady? Charlie, get a picture. This is a good one." The reporter lifted his camera. Rebecca understood, in the space between one breath and the next, precisely what was happening. The way a woman who has set 100 fractures knows a bad break by the shape of it under the skin. She had run this exact maneuver herself, on the other side of a mahogany table, in a suit that cost more than the mare and the buggy together. A nominal conveyance to clear a title cloud. Move the inconvenient parcel onto someone too small to fight, someone the machine could roll over later, at its leisure. They thought the barn was worthless. They thought she was the safe place to bury it. They were right about the first thing, and catastrophically wrong about the second, and she watched the whole hinge of it swing open in her mind. The old survey, the metes and bounds her grandfather had made her recite like scripture, the line of the barn's boundary, running with the commons, as a root runs with a tree. If they deeded her this parcel by its true description, they were not clearing the cloud. They were handing her the storm. She kept her face plain. Not hard to do. Plainness was the first thing they taught you, and the last thing you unlearned. $2, she said. $2. Gundry beamed. She drew the handkerchief from her sleeve, unfolded it, and set the 2 silver dollars on the rail one at a time, each coin ringing once against the wood. 2 coins from a handkerchief, no checkbook, no lawyer at her elbow, no phone with which to call one. To the room it was proof of everything they had already settled about her. A plain girl counting out change she could not afford to lose. The lawyer at the side table slid the papers across. She read them. She read all of them, every line, while the reporter's shutter clicked, and the mayor made a joke about how they'd be here till Christmas. And the room laughed again. Easier now, because a girl who read that slowly surely could not read very well. The description was recorded by reference to the original survey. Naturally, nobody had looked at that survey in living memory. Nobody in that room knew what it said. She signed her name in full, Rebecca S. Stoltzfus, clean and steady, and had the clerk who witnessed it been paying attention, he might have wondered where a farm girl learned to sign a legal instrument without a tremor. But he was not paying attention. None of them were. That was the whole of it, start to finish. They had decided what she was before she opened her mouth, and nothing she did afterward could get past the decision. "Keep the old thing standing if you can, dear," the mayor said, pocketing his own generosity. "Or let it fall. Either way, it's off my desk." She folded the empty handkerchief, tucked it back into her sleeve, and walked out to where the mayor was waiting. And behind her, the council moved on to the resort renderings, and the gold letters, and the woman in white on the deck, and not one of them heard the buggy wheels turn on the gravel, because the sound of it was too old to register as anything that counted. The letter came 4 days later, and not from the mayor. It came from a firm with 3 names on its door, and an address on a Philadelphia avenue Rebecca had walked 1,000 times. Preston Vale, counsel for the Hollow Springs Development Group, wrote to inform the current owner of the Stoltzfus parcel that his client would move a boundary survey crew onto the adjacent commons within the week, and that the owner's cooperation in a routine, quiet title action would be, the letter said, greatly appreciated and generously acknowledged. A number sat in the 3rd paragraph. Not a small number to a farm girl. An insult to anyone who knew what the whole tract was worth. Rebecca read it, standing in the workshop that had been her grandfather's, the page in one hand and the other flat on the cold surface of his bench, and she felt the 2 worlds she had spent her life keeping in separate rooms lean hard against the wall between them. Preston Vale. She had shared an elevator with the man. She had watched him close a widow's woodlot in an afternoon and buy the whole table around after. He would not remember her. She had been junior then, and quiet, and had left the city the same summer she made the decision that cost her nearly everything. He would not remember her, and that was the sharpest edge of the whole thing, because the not remembering was exactly how the machine ate places like Rayburn Hollow. It did not hate them. It did not even see them. That was the thing the plain people had always understood about the world, that the world could never understand about itself. It did not come for you in anger. It came with a smile and a number and a form to sign, and it called the taking a kindness, and it truly believed the kindness was real. She rode out to the barn that afternoon with her grandfather's brass folding rule in her apron pocket. An old carpenter's rule, 4 leaves of yellowed brass on tired hinges, the numbers rubbed to shadows under his thumb across a working life. She had carried it for 3 years, the way some women carry a photograph. On the days grief sat closest, she would open and close it, 1 leaf at a time, only to hear the small sound the hinges made, the sound of him measuring, always measuring, before he cut. She had not brought it to use it. She had brought it because she could not, that afternoon, stand to be there without a piece of him in her hand. The barn held as he had left it, leaning, weathered, the great frame of it still true under all the failing skin, a cathedral raised by a man who could not read a blueprint and had never needed to. The demolition notice was nailed to the door. She pulled it free and folded it small. Inside, light came down through the gaps in the roof in long, dusty blades. She stood where she had stood at 8 years old, holding the end of his tape while he called out numbers, and she let herself remember the thing she tried hardest to forget. He had sent her away. That was the part the community did not know and would not have forgiven. When she was 17 and the Rumspringer loosened its rope, when the world outside began to shine at the edges of her plain life the way it does for the ones who feel too much, Amos did not fight her. He did a stranger thing. He sat her at this bench and told her the town had been trying to take the commons since his own grandfather's day, by tax, by ordinance, by the slow, patient pressure a place learns to put on people who will not push back, that the family's whole claim rested on a survey no living lawyer had ever read, and that the Amish would always, always lose these fights, because losing quietly was itself a kind of faith. You did not sue your neighbor. You did not shame a man in his own courthouse. You bore it. You kept the paper safe. And you waited for the one child in a generation who might be built to carry both worlds without dropping either. Then he said the thing she had carried like a stone ever since. Go and learn how they take things, he said, so that one day you can stop them. Come back when you know. I will keep the barn standing until you do. She went. She learned. She learned it so well the world nearly kept her. A salary that could have bought the whole farm twice over, a door with her name going up on it, a life with soft hands. And she stayed 1 year too long, and then another, telling herself she was not ready yet, that she needed one more case, one more season, and the call came on a grey afternoon while she stood at a printer waiting on a brief. Come home, the voice said. Matty. One of the neighbour women, the words stiff and rehearsed on a borrowed phone. Your Groster Ardi has gone home to God. She made it back for the burial and not the goodbye. He had kept the barn standing every day of the 8 years she was gone, and he had died 3 days before she came home, knowing enough to be worth the sending. That was the wound, and it did not close, and she had stopped waiting for it to. She had chosen the world to save the land, and the price of the ticket had been the last conversation of her grandfather's life. Some mornings, she was sure she had chosen right. Most mornings, she was sure of nothing at all. Rebecca knelt at the northeast corner of the barn, where the great cornerstone rested that everything else was built to. She opened the folding rule, leaf by leaf, and the small sound of the hinges filled the empty barn, and for a moment she could not tell whether the wet in her eyes was the dust. On the third leaf, worn nearly to nothing under the shadow of his thumb, ran a notch, a single deliberate score across the brass, no measurement, no reason she had ever been given. She had asked him about it as a child, and he had only smiled. Now she laid the rule flat against the base of the cornerstone with the notch to the seam, and she measured, as he had taught her, from the stone toward the sill. The notch fell where a floorboard met the frame. She pried the board. Beneath it, set into the foundation and sealed with lead against a century and a half of damp, sat a box the size of a family Bible. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the original land patent granted to the first Stoltzfus to break that ground, and the survey it referenced, the true survey, the ink still black, the metes and bounds drawn in a careful hand, running the family's line clear across the 40 acres, the town now called its commons. Under the papers, in a canvas sack gone soft with age, lay coin. Silver, most of it. A working man's whole life, saved a dime at a time, and buried under the one thing he trusted to outlast the men who wanted it. She lifted a single coin to the blade of light. It was worn smooth on one face, as coins go when a thumb keeps returning to them, and she understood that he had sat here in the dark of some winter she would never be able to name and counted this money out and put it away. Not for himself, never once for himself, but for the day the fight finally came, and one of them had to be ready to pay for it. Read the ground before you trust the wall, he had told her 10,000 times. Keep the paper safe. He had not meant lumber. He had meant this. He had meant her. She did not act on what she knew right away, and afterwards she could not fully explain the days she let slip past, except that stepping back into the world she had left felt like pulling on a coat she had sworn never to wear again, and she was afraid of how well it would still fit. There were nights she took the bar card from the tin where she kept it and turned it in the lamplight, the raised letters of her own name gone strange to her, and asked her grandfather's empty chair whether a woman could reach back into that world for a single afternoon and not leave a door standing open behind her. The chair, being a chair, told her nothing. She knew the answer anyway. You could not unhear what you knew. You could only choose what to do with it, and then live inside the choosing. Vale's crew came and went at the commons, their orange stakes marching across the pasture. The mayor gave an interview in front of the gold renderings. A second letter arrived. Its number lower this time, its courtesy thinner. A date named for an emergency hearing on the demolition of the unsafe Stoltzfus structure. Because a barn on the ground raises no questions, and a barn still standing might make a stubborn man look twice at his own deed. They meant to knock it down before anyone thought to ask what its boundary described. They were fast and thorough, and altogether certain no one was watching who could read what they were reading. Mattie found her at the bench 2 nights before the hearing. The old woman studied the box and the papers, and the girl who had come home from the world with her grandfather's coin in her lap. And she did not smile. "If you do this thing," Mattie said quietly, "you will have to be what you were out there, in front of all of them. They will look at you and not see one of us anymore." "I know," Rebecca said. "And after, when it's done, will you still sit at the table?" No accusation in it, only the question. Your grossdaddy wanted the land saved. He never once said what it would cost you to save it. Maybe he did not let himself count. Rebecca had no answer she trusted, so she gave the true one. "I don't know, but he kept it standing for me. I can stand up once for him." The hearing was held at the barn itself, because Gundry wanted the ruin in the frame when the town voted to tear it down. A little theater, the mayor beside the eyesore, generous even in demolition. He had not expected the owner to come. Owners of $2 barns did not, in his experience, come. She arrived in the buggy, and she wore the grey dress and the black bonnet, because she would not pretend to be anything she was not. Not for them, not now. Vale waited by the barn door in a coat that had never seen a field, running the hearing like the formality he believed it to be. Gundry was working the reporter. When Rebecca stepped down from the buggy, the mayor's face performed its half-second smile. "Come to say goodbye to the old place, dear? Very sweet. We'll be quick." "I've come," Rebecca said, "to record an instrument." She said it plainly, in the plain cadence they all expected, and for one more moment nothing changed, because the words were right, but the bonnet was still doing their thinking for them. Then she opened the folder and laid the patent and the survey on the tailgate of the county truck and began to speak. And the cadence stayed plain, but the words did not. The words were senior recorded title and boundary by original survey and defect in the town's chain and quiet title in favor of the record holder. And she set them down one after another with the flat certainty of a woman who had built her whole exile out of exactly these bricks. Vale crossed the mud. He picked up the survey. He read the metes and bounds, and his eyes went to the orange stakes. Marching across the commons, his client had already spent 2 years and a great deal of money assembling, and the color left his face like water leaving a field. This survey is senior to the commons plat. Not a question, he was telling himself. By 7 generations, Rebecca said, who drafted this filing. He turned the pages, hunting the attorney's block, the thing that would tell him which of his own kind he was facing. There was none. Only her signature at the foot of the recording sheet, the same clean, steady hand from the council chamber. He read the name, then lifted his eyes to her and truly saw her. For the first time, the bonnet, the field rough hands, the face he could not place and was, all at once, horribly beginning to. He took out his phone. He searched a name against a bar directory like a drowning man reaching for a rope. Stoltzfus, Vale said, and his voice had gone very quiet. Rebecca S. Stoltzfus, admitted to the Pennsylvania bar. A pause the length of a falling thing. Real property. You were at Harrow and Keck. For a while, Rebecca said, I left. She did not become someone else, standing there in the barn mud. She had dreaded this for days on the belief that she would feel the plain girl fall away and the other one step forward. And it did not happen like that at all. She only let them see more of who she had always been, the woman who read the ground and kept the paper safe, and had walked out of a world of soft hands because a leaning barn an hour from Lancaster was worth more to her than any of it. Warren Gundry stopped smiling. It went out of his face by degrees, the way a lamp dies when the current fails, and what lay under it was not surprise. It was calculation, arriving far too late. Now hold on. He started forward. You never said, at the meeting, you never said one word about who you... You didn't ask, Rebecca said. You decided. She did not raise her voice. She had learned, in the world and at this bench both, that the quietest sentence in a room is the one people carry home. And she let it sit in the cold air between them until the reporter's camera came around and found her face, and the mayor understood, a breath too late, which photograph the morning paper would run. The rest of it happened slowly, and without her, exactly as she had known it would. The quiet title filing went into the county record 2 days later. The original survey recorded beneath it. Senior and clean, and $40 million of financing woke to find it had been standing on ground it did not own. The consortium could not move a shovel across the commons without the record holder, and the record holder was a plain woman who would not sell. Preston Vale withdrew from the matter inside a week. Nothing was left in it for a man who bought at pennies, because nothing was left to buy at pennies. And a reporter who had been handed the easy photograph of a generous mayor found himself holding a very different story, that the town's own council had drawn the nominal deed, that Warren Gundry held a quiet interest in the very consortium he had rezoned the commons to serve, that the $2 barn had been the last clean way to bury a title he needed gone. A man does not survive that in a town the size of Rayburn Hollow. The state opened a review. The gold renderings came down off the council wall. None of it required Rebecca to be in the room, and she was not in the room for any of it, because standing over a fallen man to watch him fall was a thing her grandfather would never have done, and so neither did she. She did one last thing with the paper, and it surprised the lawyers more than all the rest. She did not keep the commons. She placed the whole 40 acres into a trust. Plain language, no loopholes, drafted in a single sitting at her grandfather's bench, that held the ground as pasture and woodlot and covered bridge in perpetuity, for the town and the Amish both, unsellable, undevelopable, as it had stood since before any Gundry drew breath. She kept only the barn. She had paid $2 for it. It was hers. The evening she came home for good, the light was going gold across the fields, and she heard the thing she had missed most in all her years away before she saw it. Hooves on the gravel lane, her own mare, and under the sound of them the deeper quiet the world outside had never once managed to hold. Wood smoke on the air. Cut hay. The first stars coming up cold and clear over the ridge, more of them than the city had ever let her stand under. A dog barked once down toward the Fisher place, and then thought better of it. Somewhere a screen door. The small, ordinary music of people living the life they had chosen, out past the covered bridge, out of sight of the highway, keeping to the old rows. Someone had left a lamp burning in the workshop window, though she had told no one she was coming, because in a place like this, you do not have to be told a thing to know it. Mattie waited at the gate. She did not ask how it had gone. She reached out and took the mare's bridle, lifting a weight from someone who had carried it far enough. Rebecca went into the workshop. She set her grandfather's folding rule on the bench where it belonged, open to the third leaf, the notch catching the last of the light. Beside it, she laid the $2 silver, the same two, ransomed back out of the county's record and carried home in the handkerchief that had held them the day he pressed them into her hand. A man should always be able to buy back one thing that matters. She understood him now. She thought she would spend the rest of her life understanding him a little more each year, and never all the way, and that this was likely the shape of loving someone you lost before you were finished. She did not know whether she had chosen right. That was the truth of it, and she had made her peace with never making peace. The world was still in her. It would always be in her, in the ease of her signature and the reach of what she knew, and the corner office some stranger sat in now. She had put on the coat, and it had fit, and she had taken it off again, and neither of those was a lie. She belonged to the barn, and the bench, and the hooves on the lane. She belonged also a little to the elevator, and the survey, and the fight. Both were true. Her grandfather had lived his whole life inside one world, and had sent her out to master the other. And somewhere in the space between the two of them, the land was saved, and neither of them had ever gotten to be a whole and simple thing. The barn stood. It would go on standing. She had bought it for $2 from men who believed they had bought her, and she had kept the paper safe and read the ground before she trusted the wall, and out past the covered bridge in the country west of Lancaster, the pasture went dark and quiet, as it had gone dark and quiet for 7 generations, holding its secret, giving up nothing to anyone who had not first learned how to ask. She latched the workshop door. The lamp burned. Somewhere a horse shifted in its stall, and the plain dark came down over Rayburn Hollow, and the quietest hands in the county folded, at last, and were still.